The last project that got some extra love this week is the one that you've all been waiting for. This is fitting me in all the ways I wish it would not. Yep, that's right. You got to tell someone about my knits today. I don't even know who this girl is. Who made this? Was it me?
I'm Nora, and this is also known as Nora Knits.
Hello there, I'm Nora, and you're watching, also known as Nora Knits. Thank you so much for joining me for another podcast episode today. I feel like it's one of those episodes where we're going to have lots of little pieces to catch up on, nothing major. But there is a big update on the Grayling sweater, aka my 2024 holiday dress that never arrived for 2024, as well as some updates for the very casual knit along that we're hosting over here, which is hashtag fffFebruary, and that is Fix, Finish, Freshen Up February. I've heard back from so many people who have been enjoying this little push to get some projects done before spring really comes around. I think that's exactly the idea here, is really just to do a little preemptive spring cleaning so that once the beautiful weather hits and that inspiration kind of sinks in again, it feels like we've all wiped the slate clean. So by all means, feel free to add frog to your F's for this knit along. And if you want to stay up to date with how other people are utilizing this little knit along challenge, then just be sure to check out the hashtag fffFebruary on Instagram or in the comments down below. I love being able to see what it is that everyone else is getting up to, and it definitely makes it feel like I'm not alone in and just trying to, get this stuff done. Before we get into everything else, I'll just tell you quickly what it is that I am wearing today, and that is my Ciclamen sweater by Cecilia Garcia Rodrigo. I knit this up around this time actually last year, and it is Karen Blossom Cakes in the colorway Cabana, which is a blown yarn that's made up of a cotton tube and then acrylic fiber is blown into it. It has this natural striping to it. It was actually my second time using this yarn, as I had knit my sister a sweater out of the same yarn in a different color back in 2023. If you've been with the channel since the time I knit this, you know I had some issues along the way. I can't say that I recommend this pattern unless you don't mind doing a little bit of mental math yourself. There were a few errors that I had found, and it's just one of those things that when you buy a pattern, you really do hope that you can move through it without any silly errors. That's one thing if a pattern doesn't fit or something, but if you've paid for the pattern, you really do hope that that means it's been through all of the processes it's supposed to, so that you, the consumer, are not the one actually finding those mistakes as if you are test knitting it. So that's something that I had an issue with, but overall I do like the end result I have here. It's a simple top-down raglan with the V-neck, and then there's a 2x2 ribbing detail that goes down the body and under the sleeves and into the cuffs. And looking at this now, I'm realizing that it is a little bit more beat up, but I just thought it was a nice kind of cozy sweater for today, going for cozy vibes. And with the pinky color, it felt appropriate for the Valentine's Day weekend. So happy Valentine's Day. And with all that out of the way, I do think that we should go ahead and dive on in. Let me start with the biggest project update, which is, of course, the Grayling sweater 2024 holiday dress. It's an all-over cabled sweater by Magdalena Parker, and I decided that this would be something I would knit into a full-length kind of maxi style dress. I'm knitting mine out of Knit Picks Wonder Fluff in the colorway Espresso Heather, and that's actually another blown yarn, which is kind of funny. I guess a quick just comparison on the two, the Karen Blossom Cakes, of course, you're talking about an acrylic versus a baby alpaca, so already there's kind of just a big difference, but The Wonder Fluff yarn provides a lot more space inside of the tube that the fibers are blown into. And so it's very, it's kind of more easy to manipulate. You can kind of tug on it and get a thinner yarn, or let it be very light and fluffy if you're going to knit it on larger needles, which if you're working with blown yarn, I would recommend using the largest needle you're comfortable kind of getting away with, and whatever you like the fabric most in. But the Karen Blossom Cakes is definitely a lot more tubular. It's not quite as fluffy and bouncy. And so you do wind up with a little bit more of a dense fabric, even if you're working on that largest needle possible. I want to say that this one was knit on a 4.5 millimeter needle, but I don't know for sure. But either way, the tube is just so much smaller than the Wonder Fluff. So maybe that's something to look out for with a blown yarn. These are the only two I've worked with. So I guess I've loved working with the Wonder Fluff versus the Karen Blossom Cakes. I didn't mind at all, but I would definitely say to look for something that has that kind of larger tube for that extra fluff to kind of have space in there. When we left off last week with the Grayling, I was so close to being done, and I kept thinking like it would be really nice to get it done for Valentine's Day. And then I realized like we don't do anything for Valentine's Day. In fact, I kind of like to avoid going out at all costs. So we spend Valentine's Day in. But I think probably next week we'll wind up going out for dinner one night. So that's kind of the main goal, which meant that I was able to back off I took my foot a little bit off the gas on this project, since I had really been so deadline focused between my dad's sweater and then the Grayling. It was nice to just kind of work on it as I wanted to. The only things I had left to do was to finish the cuffs on the sleeves, I believe, and bind those off, as well as address the collar and then the hem of the dress. So let me throw her onto Helena the Hanger so we can see where we're at. Okay, here she is, and we are officially ready to block the Grayling. Obviously, you can't tell in the frame that I have here that it is in fact knit all the way down to the hem. As I was talking through this last week, I had like a little aha moment while I was thinking out loud. And that was to knit the hem to the length I thought was appropriate, but then pop it onto some try-it-on tubing, and that's how I'm going to leave it for the final blocking of this project, so that if I do need to make any adjustments to the length of the final garment, I'll be able to do so a lot more easily, which also kind of means that I'm going to be more likely to address anything like that. So as it is, everything else is done just except for the bind off on the hem. Now, what you're seeing here, you might remember that this upper portion of the sweater had been blocked months ago now, but I do think that you can kind of see the difference between the parts that have been blocked versus those that haven't, which is just a little bit more exciting to see like what is it going to look like when it's done. I'm very eager to get there. The few things that I wanted to talk to you about were just the fact that when it comes to following the pattern, I started this in the size 4. I then wound up modifying it so that I'm knitting between the sizes 3 and 4. And then other than that, the only changes that I made, obviously other than knitting it so much longer, is just I did add an extra half of a cable repeat to each of the sleeves, which means that Magdalena in the pattern tells you to do a final cable and then start the ribbing. And on both the hem and the sleeves, I basically did that final cable twist and then still knit down half of the cable length. And so my ribbing kind of spits out of a little straight shot between each cable twist, if that makes sense, which is just a little bit of a different look. I think it looks really nice in the photos that Magdalena has done, where that cable does twist and then the ribbon kind of comes out of it and it looks like it just kind of twisted into that. And I think that's really pretty. But I kind of don't have a preference one way or the other. I don't mind it just being straight at the bottom either. So I followed all of the decreasing for the sleeves that she tells you to do in the pattern. And then just for the extra length that I deviated from the pattern, I just knit that straight. Didn't do any additional decreases until the ones that she tells you to do for the cuff, which even then I was kind of on the fence about. But I went back and looked at all of the different Ravelry photos and I decided that I liked the way that it had decreased at the cuff. It doesn't create a balloon sleeve. It's just the slightest bit of a taper. So that didn't bother me. And then I actually wound up doing the recommended amount of ribbing on all of my cuffs and hem, which was the kind of 3-ish inches that I was going for. Now, something that I will say is I did the setup rows for a tubular Italian bind off, and with the Wonder Fluff, I didn't know if that was something I'd need to do, but I also was so aware of the fact that everyone says this yarn grows and stretches, and I find that when I use this setup rows to a tubular bind off, I don't get as much flaring. And so while it's a little bit tedious to take that extra step, I did do it on the cuffs. Now, the point where I've paused on the hem of the dress, and I'll just try and kind of lift this up a little bit here. It's so long. I left off right before the setup rows on the hem because I didn't know how that was going to go. And of course, because if I want to adjust the length, I would have to undo those setup rows anyway. But I feel like for the amount of stitches that are on the hem versus the sleeves, there's a chance I'm not going to do any setup rows down there, even though I do feel like that's where it needs it. The issue was doing the setup rows. So you're knitting one, slipping one, and then going back with the Italian sewn bind off at all. You're just so prone to catching the little parts of the tube of the yarn that it kind of became a tangly mess, and I'm finding that the edges of these cuffs don't have a ton of stretch, and I think that that's because there's a lot of weird little like loops and catches that I made. But I think for the cuffs, it's not going to be an issue. Where it could be an issue would be on the hem. So I'm still on the fence about whether or not I'll do that. We'll just see how this blocks out. So yeah, I added a little extra length on the sleeves. I did the cuffs otherwise according to the pattern. And then for the collar, this was something that from the beginning of having this idea to knit this into a dress, I actually really thought I was going to do like a funnel neck collar, but ultimately, I decided to keep things a little bit more casual and a little bit more everyday wearable in addition to something I can dress up. I really did like the folded over collar, both for its just substantial, if it was just a single layer, but at that same depth. I think it wouldn't ground this full giant dress as much. So I went for the folded over collar. The one thing I did do differently is mine is actually a little bit taller than hers is in the pattern. And that was just something that after looking at a lot of different projects on Ravelry, I just kept wishing that it was a little bit thicker. So that was what I did on mine. Now she does say in the pattern that when you're done, you should go back with an elastic thread. I've still never done that to any of my sweaters. I've never had to, but I could see needing to do that with this one. So that's just another thing I'll keep an eye on. And then otherwise, the way that I had done the folded over collar here is the same way that I've been doing lately, which is to knit, pick up the stitches, knit the height of the collar, double, fold it in, and then I would take a significantly larger needle. So this project was knit up on 5.5 millimeter needles. And then this neckline, I think, was actually down on a 4 millimeter needle. I went in, I think, with an 8 millimeter needle in my right hand and used that needle to scoop up the first stitch at the base of the ribbing. So to the point where you're actually sewing it down to. Scoop that stitch up, pop it onto the needle next to the same column stitch, and then knit those two together. So those are now sitting as one stitch on that chunky right hand needle. Do it again for the next stitch. And then once you have 2 stitches on your needle, it's kind of a standard just bind off where you scoop up the first stitch and drop it over the second. I've just found now that I've done this quite a few times that having a significantly larger needle makes all of the difference. So I'm going to reference that actually again later today. But I definitely have found that that is my preferred technique for folded over sewn down collars. I've done the crochet hook method and wound up with a collar that was kind of skewed to the side. I just wasn't as comfortable and confident keeping my stitches in line. I've done 3 needle bind offs. I've done the whole bit. This is the most simple and effective and really easy way. And as you can tell, there's still stretch in that seam. It's not too tight there. So I'm really happy with that. After all of that, I just had to go back through and weave in so many ends. And I'll be perfectly honest, I weaved in a lot of ends. I also wound up just taking some of the ends that I had kind of already knit over while I was going, and I just kind of tied them off together where I was joining in a new ball of yarn in those situations. Not every time did I do that, but where I felt like I could get away with it, I definitely did. And so, yeah, after I film this right now, I am going to do the final before blocking try on. So you should be seeing that footage. But I will say that when I had tried this on just to check the length while I was still making it, I literally looked in the mirror and I was like, I look like a dirty turnip. At the moment, this fit is probably the least flattering thing I've ever put on my body. And so whoever told me that the Wonder Fluff really grows, I'm counting on you being honest with me, because I have basically banked this entire fit project dress on the fact that you guys said it should grow a lot in blocking. Now, of course, I did block this top section, and when I measured, that was getting the measurements that I was going for. So I'm assuming that just means there is a ton of growth in the blocking process. But right now, this is fitting me in all of the ways I wish it would not. So definitely keep your fingers crossed for me. I am going to stretch this guy widthwise because, like I said, I can always add length to the bottom. In fact, if I have to add length, I'll just keep adding ribbing. I think that there would be nothing wrong with having like a 6-inch ribbing at the bottom if that's what I have to do. And I have erred on the side of it being a little longer just because I plan to stretch it widthwise, but oh my, am I going to be stretching it. So yeah, I'm really excited to see where this is at and to be able to see that really full comparison side to side. I'm going to leave the rest of the stats for the final finished object episode, which will be in the next podcast for sure. But as it is, I know, I think I bought about 12 balls of the Wonder Fluff. Not 12, 22? Now I'm making things up. I know that right now I think I have about 5 balls left, which is a good amount. So I have so much yarn in this color. I'm going to have to come up with something to do with it. But as it is, it definitely is feeling a lot heavier than I thought it would, and a lot heavier than it had felt as I went. And that was the whole point of why I chose the blown yarn for this project, was because I was going for something kind of lightweight, and it being a dress, of course, it's a ton of yarn in there, so it's never going to be so lightweight, but that was kind of the goal here. And I'll have to just compare it to some of my heavier sweaters, but it definitely did get a lot heavier in the last half of it. Just more so than I had anticipated in my head. I don't think it'll be an issue. It's just something I thought I would note. So yeah, I think that those are all the updates. I did have like a little funny story. I had brought this to the auto shop when we were having a little work done on the car, and I was sitting there for a few hours, which meant that there's a lot of people that kind of come in and out for just quick services. And I was finishing up all of the details on this one while I was there. And if you've ever wanted just a little attention about your knits, you want someone to ask you what you're working on, bring your project to the auto shop. Oh my gosh. Every person that walked in there asked me about what I was making, told me stories about how their grandmother used to knit. One guy said his mom taught him how to knit. Now she's teaching his kids how to knit. There was a woman who just came over and sat down next to me and was like fully geeking out. We were having a whole conversation. She's a shawl knitter. It was just kind of so funny. The guys that worked at the shop, they're like, so tell us, like, what are you doing? And they couldn't comprehend that I was knitting a dress. Like, this made no sense to them, and it was honestly hysterical. And I definitely did leave feeling like, yep, that's right. You got to tell someone about my knits today. It was a very funny experience. And we enlightened a few people about the world of knitting that day. So if you're needing someone to talk to about your knits, maybe bring it on into the auto shop. You don't even have to have a service then. Just sit there and say, "Oh, I'm waiting for my car to be done," and just knit away. And people be asking all day. So anyway, that is the silly update on my Grayling. Let me tell you how long it's been on the needles. As of today, it's 122 days, and I always close that number down when it's done being blocked. So it definitely will not be going over 130 days because this will be done and blocked the next time you see it. All right, you guys, that is the Grayling by Magdalena Parker. The next project we're going to chat about today is the Granada by Claudia Quintanilla from Unit Toronto. She did gift the book and the yarn for me to complete this project, but it's a really beautiful blousey sweater top with a stockinette body and then these crocheted bobble sleeves. The yarn that they had gifted is the Ito Sensai and Kinu in the colorways cinnamon and peach. I am knitting mine in the size 4, and I'm so excited because I met my goal. It felt really good to say in the last podcast where I was hoping to be at, and now I can tell you that I am indeed there. Let me get her onto the hanger so we could check it out. Seeing the progress keeper on there now makes me believe that I probably didn't move it after last week. Oh no, did I? Okay, so I may have just picked up the fronts and knit the front of this sweater, and then since then I have done just a lot more work than I even realized. So yeah, that's the progress keeper. And the goal for the week was to get this to the point where I was knitting it in the round, and I did. This project is knit up on 3.5 millimeter needles, and it's a silk as well as a silk mohair yarn. I just tapped into the second ball of the silk mohair. And I have to say, I'm not one to typically work with mohair. I don't do a ton of that. But every time I do, it is really fun and refreshing. And in this fabric in particular, it's creating this very lightweight and kind of summery fabric, which you wouldn't expect, of course, from a mohair. But with the silk, it's just so light and airy. And I think that it's a good thing for me to keep in mind as we're coming into the spring season. I feel like I'm knitting something that's very appropriate to wear when it's done, and that feels really good. I don't typically time things that well. The front of this was knit very similarly to the way that the back is, which was just increasing for the armhole shaping, and then once we got to the underarms, casting on some stitches and then knitting it in the round. Now, something that I discovered from last week to now is I thought that once I got to the body, it was just mindless stockinette, go, go, go until you reach the hem. But there actually are increases worked into it, and I haven't gotten there just yet. I'm actually about to. As soon as I pick this up again, I'll be referencing the pattern one more time to check the rate at which I should be increasing. And I don't know then if it's going to increase and then decrease. So I don't know if this is a fully shaped kind of a garment or if it's a little bit more A-line, because it's not something I picked up on in the photos either, but I'm going with the flow. I'm really enjoying this. It's been a lovely reprieve to finally have some stockinette in the round. It feels really good to be doing that. And again, just in this more fun spring kind of color weight all of that. Now, while I am so excited to get to the crocheted sleeves on this one, I am going to just keep chugging along on the body and let this be my peaceful stockinette project while I get the other things done that I'm hoping to. And then I will return to the crocheted sleeves either when I'm done with the body or just when I've finished some of the other more mindful projects that I have. But this is something that is part of my Fix, Finish, and Freshen Up February. My goal is to get this done by the end of February. And I will mention too, there is a chance that my end of February is kind of going to bleed into March. And realistically, my deadline here is just to have a clean slate for spring. So whatever doesn't get done in February, I'm going to continue focusing on until March 21st, that springtime. There was a comment that had mentioned it, and you actually kind of read my mind because that was my goal anyway. But just so you know, if February ends and this is not done, it will not fall to the wayside. It's still going to be my goal to get through this checklist before I move on. So as of today, this one's been on the needles for 56 days and we're finally hitting a rhythm with this one. It just goes to show it's another one of those things when you have a project that starts with the back and then you have to pick up stitches and then you have to increase and you have to think about it a little bit more. Even though there's no texture, it's still a lot of having to be aware of what you're knitting. And so sometimes you just get hung up on that one section like I did where I had the back panel done and it literally sat like that for a week or two while I was working on other projects before I had the capacity to sit down and pick up the stitches for the shoulders. So now that we're where we are, I definitely think we're in a better groove and I think you'll be seeing a lot more progress on this one in the coming weeks. So that is the quick update on the Granada by Claudia Quintanilla. At this point, we are into the kind of like strictly knit along whips basically, right? So the Grayling and the Granada, those have been active whips for the past few months and they've just kind of been lumped in to this knit along. But the rest of the things I'm going to tell you about are returning projects that are getting that extra TLC that they need in that Fix, Finish, Freshen Up category. So I did make myself a kind of list of to-dos at the end of last podcast, but something I thought was actually really nice was especially coming off of the major deadline whip and then the big behemoth of a project, the Grayling sweater dress. I actually found myself really loving the fact that I had 6 to 8 different things that I could do that were going to be kind of quick and easy and a little bit more mindless and just more bite-sized, manageable objectives. So the list went out the window a little bit. And instead, I just kind of was able to decide on each given day, like, what is it that I'm in the mood to work on? What's going to satisfy what I need right now while I'm still finishing projects? How can I use this knit along to supplement things in the most kind of effective and efficient and satisfying way? So let me start with one that was pretty brief but did get a little bit of attention. And that was my dad's birthday sweater from last year. This is the Learn to Knit a Men's Sweater by Stacey Perry. And this is on the Freshen Up list. So far, I have hit it with the D pillar and oh my gosh, what a treat that was. It made the biggest difference in the fabric. It looks so fresh and new. And honestly, I've just been needing to wash and block it again, but I kept thinking I was about to finish the Grayling, so I didn't want them to be competing for space on the blocking mats. And that's the only reason why it hasn't been washed yet, but it's going to happen at least this weekend. I might even do that before the Grayling. We'll see. I don't know. But this did get depilled, so that was part of freshening up. Another quick mention is an old whip that I've just kind of picked up again more recently, and that is the Tolsta tank by Rebecca Clow, the Crayabea. This project has notably been my purse knitting or my kind of version of sock knitting, and mostly what I call my soccer watching knitting. So since soccer has been back on and kind of getting into full swing. I have been picking this one up more recently. You might be able to see the progress keeper here. That's where I was the last time you guys saw this. Now I am knitting mine out of some leftover drops February in the red colorway. And I am knitting mine on a tinier needle than even what she suggests for the fingering weight version, which for me is some 2.5 millimeter needles, and this is a bottom up construction tank top. I'm sure you've seen it before. I've knit one before where you knit basically up to the underarm and then you split and you can choose the neckline that you're going for. I'm pretty sure I'm just going to be knitting this into the vest version, but I still have a little ways to go. However, I am kind of running low on yarn. I have the rest of this ball here, as well as a couple other small scraps in my stash. So it might be more of a game time decision, just kind of what neckline I go for based on that, or I might even just make this cropped. This is kind of a very low stakes project for me. It's just something to have when literally nothing else is knit in the round a ball. This gets picked up, but this is definitely going to be swapped out a little bit more for the Granada, as that is my stockinette knit in the round project. That's kind of how I play it, that this is literally last resource. Whereas if I have a stockinette in the round project, that takes priority over this one pretty much always. So I just thought I would give you a quick update because this is something I do pick up from time to time when I can, when I need to, and it's still really great for that. As of today, it's been on my needles for 215 days, which makes sense. It's literally the lowest of the totem pole projects, but just thought I'd kind of throw that there. This is almost a freshen up, as in just bring it back into the cycle of things. Next, let's talk about the fix it category that I was interested in working on this week, and that was my yoga winter sweater by Naringa Rook. Let me get it onto Helena the Hanger because it's probably seen the most progress of all of these knit along things. So this sweater found itself in the fix it category after being a pretty recent finished object. But I do wear it so much. So I kind of immediately had a couple things I wanted to tweak. And that was the length of the sleeves. They were pretty significantly too short for my liking, though wearable. I wanted them to fit a little bit more like snugly like these ones. And then the other thing that I kind of knew was an issue the whole time is the turtleneck collar on this. So this garment originally was knit from the top down and it's a raglan style, but you start with the turtleneck and then just knit the sweater down from there. So there's no going back, picking up stitches, working your way up. And so I found that my turtleneck edge had a couple of flaws. One being that my cast on edge was pretty sloppy looking and it just kind of always bothered me. The other major thing was that I felt like the length, it was just like a half an inch too tall. And then something else I had noticed after wearing it quite a bit was that the turtleneck itself, it was kind of just so floppy and it kept wanting to crease in the middle, which was most definitely because one day I had actually turned it in on itself because it was sloppy on the edge and it was a little too tall for me. But after that point, it just, I could never get it to sit right. And of course I could block it and that would change, but it still bothered me that it was so susceptible to doing that. So I kind of did a little three birds, one stone action. And I wound up, I'll kind of fold this down and you might be able to see. I went back in with the same needle size. I think that it was a 5 millimeter needle. And I just picked up stitches around the top of the collar and simply continued knitting some 2x2 rib. Now, I thought I was being fancy and I actually switched up the pearls kind of now meet a knit stitch and vice versa. I wish I hadn't done that. I just, you know what? It was just a little impulse thing. I was like, oh, that'll be fun. It is what it is. No one's going to see that. That's on the inside. But that was something I thought I was doing for funsies. And I kind of just, it was unnecessary. So I picked up the stitches. I knit down to, if this was all standing up still, it probably folded down to about here. if I were to fold it exactly at the point I picked up the stitches, so that when I did fold it down and seam it down, it would then hide that little pick up seam in what used to be the top of the collar about a half an inch on the inside, which means I shrunk that collar down by about a half inch. I made it a lot tighter at the top because now you're seeing a folded edge versus that raw cast on. And then it's way more substantial now having the double layer of fabric. So this is what I was talking about when I said I would mention that way of seaming something down. Again, it's the same way I had done things here. Now it was a little bit different because there was no pickup stitches and then knit up. I was actually scooping up the stitch that had been the last row of 2x2 rib before the body of the sweater started. So it just made for a little bit more of an awkward kind of experience, but the rules are the same. I just did things a little bit differently because where the ribbing ends on the collar, it actually sits just a little bit more kind of on the clavicle and not so much at the base of the neck. And because there was never that pickup stitches point, there was no kind of clear seam of where to stitch the turtleneck down to. So I didn't want to create one by sewing the collar down. And so what I did, and I don't know that this was even necessary, worth it, I don't know, it was just me following my intuition, and that was fun, is I scooped up my stitch that I was going to be seaming down to, popped it on the needle. I used a huge needle for this one as well. Knit those two together, got that onto the right hand needle, and then for the next stitch, I simply knit that stitch. So now I have the two stitches on my right hand needle, but the first one had been knit together with the base of the turtleneck. And then the second one was just knit. And I did my little bind off. And I continued that way the whole way down. So every other stitch was seamed down. And I thought my thinking here was that it would allow for a lot more stretch, which I need because of the way that this fits a little bit lower. But also I was hoping that was kind of creating a little bit more of a tacking down situation than I was a full seam. So I was really hoping it wouldn't disrupt the line of the turtleneck just flowing into the rest of the sweater. And I'm happy to say that it really did. I think it didn't change the look of the base of that turtleneck really whatsoever. It looks pretty tidy. If you look super close, you could see which stitch was the one I scooped up, but it's not a big enough difference that anyone else would know. And then the only thing that's left to do with this is to reblock it, which I'm going to give the full sweater a reblock when I'm done making all of the edits. But when I do reblock this, I am going to kind of just lift up on the turtleneck a little bit. And then I'm going to kind of try to stretch it out. Now that it is the double layer, the new inside layer is like hugging my neck when I put it on. And so I just want it to kind of sit hovering around my neck. But right now, I'm really pleased with the way that changed things. So I'm so glad I took the time to do it. Now, the other thing, like I said, was the sleeve length I found to be a little bit too short. And so far, I have fixed one of them. So I did actually unpick the bind off. This was a Rook cast off Naringa Rook. I'm assuming it's her own, branded bind off there. So I just unpicked that. I'll use this sleeve as an example. I unpicked this bind off. It was kind of tedious that you just used a small needle to kind of unpick it. That's what I was doing. And once I got to the end of the bind off, I just was ripping out yarn until I got back to the stockinette sleeve. Once I was there, I actually just knit the same amount of rows that I had in the ribbing again in stockinette, and then just started the cuff all over again. It was really easy. It took just an afternoon to do. I will say that right now, so the yarn that's making up the last bit of stockinette is the yarn that was in that 2x2 bind off. So it's super squiggly and textured and really awful looking right now. And I'm banking on that blocking out. I can't see it being an issue, but I just went ahead and used that yarn. It did not bother me one bit. We all know that this sweater has its imperfections already. So if it even does wind up being a little bit looser, it does not bother me. doesn't faze me one bit. And then I went through, did my 2x2 rib once more and did the Rook cast off again. And I will say, I critiqued that Rook cast off the first time I had done it. I didn't think it looked particularly tidy or nice. It kind of just looked, I don't know, like I had said at the time, it just looked like nothing. It was just kind of an edge. And I think that this time around, I got a lot more of an even finish. So I'm happy with the way that it looks. So another reason it was great to just do that again. Yeah, all I have left to do on this one is to do that same process on the other sleeve. And then this whole thing will get another wash and block. It needs it too, because I've been wearing it so much before making these changes anyway. So yay! That is the fix it part of this week's podcast. The last project that got some extra love this week is the one that you've all been waiting for, and that is my Sand Cardigan by Ula Knitwear, Maria Isaiva. I'm knitting this out of Nora Madara in the colorway 01 Sake. This is a super duper long cardigan, a duster cardigan, you might say. It has pockets, and I have just been so hung up on the double knit button bands because it goes from your ankles to the back of your neck and then back down to your ankles again. So it's a lot of double knitting to do, and I'm really proud of myself because I actually got quite a bit of it done this week. Here we have it. Right here you can see my beautiful Sable and Stone stitch marker progress keeper. And that means that I knit all of the double knit button band in the past week. And I gotta tell you, I know that it doesn't look like a ton, but that was literally hours and hours of double knitting. It is such a long process, and it's just not something I have the attention span to do for really long periods of time. But I forced myself this week. I went out to a coffee shop. I sat and put in a couple hours there. This has kind of been the project that I've been telling myself before I go to bed. If I'm in the mood to knit on something, it has to be this one, because I'm typically just putting in, 15 minutes, half an hour, and then it goes away. So all of that adds up eventually. But right now, I am pretty much actually right at the top of the pocket hole that you see on the side of the cardigan here. So now I just have to go from the top of the pocket down to the hem. This is probably a better way to show you that. This is how much more I have to do. And honestly, this feels like nothing after it's been sitting this whole time. I mean, hitting the halfway point, it just didn't feel like I made enough progress on it. So that was why it wound up just sitting there. I just knew I still had that full other half to do, but doing it in the bite-sized amounts that I've been over the week, I'm so happy with the progress I've made. So with that, let me move my progress keeper. Now, I fully intend to finish this one, like I said, by the end of February, by the beginning of spring, whichever it may be. It's getting done in the next couple of weeks. And so the other things that I still have to do here are the pockets. This is something that was a huge topic of conversation way back when I had actually been at that point on the garment. And I think what I've decided for how I'm doing my pockets, it's just going to be a little bit differently from what she tells you to do in the pattern. So I think I will be starting them with the Nora Madara, so that from what you can kind of see on the outside, you'll see like a little peek of the Nora Madara. I think maybe not even though. And then at some point I had purchased a ball of a finer yarn, and I think it even has an acrylic component to it. I have no idea where it is right now. I have to find it. I'm pretty sure it is in a box with the rest of my Nora Madara, which I'm going to need probably more of soon anyway. So I should be able to find all that at the same time. But it's basically just a solid gray yarn that's a way thinner gauge than the Nora Madara. And that's pretty much what I'm using for the pockets, just so that I don't wind up with so much bulk in an area where you really don't want it. But otherwise, everything else is done except for those pockets, the button band, and then just the cuffs on the sleeves, which I've been waiting to give this one more try on with the button band, which actually now I probably can, since it's actually covering the shoulders now, but I'll wait because I know I'm not going to get to that in the next week. And yeah, the cuffs are just a folded over cuff. So I'm pretty sure I'm at the point where all I have to do is knit kind of the length of the cuff and then fold it back. So we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, and good thing, because this project has been on the needles for, drum roll please, 361 days today. So this will be my first time ever having a project go past the year mark, and I don't plan for it to be much more than that. I actually think I had bought this yarn on Valentine's Day last year. So yeah, it's been a long one, but it's not one that I wanted to rush because this yarn was such a dream and luxury purchase for me, one that I don't typically make. And so I never wanted to work on it out of resentment. And I'm very glad that I made that decision because as I'm getting through the button band, I'm just admiring the fabric again. If you're not familiar with the Nora Madara, it's basically a gray beige. Mine tends to lean a little bit more gray, but there's so much imperfection in the Nora yarns. That's kind of their whole shtick, which is kind of mine too. And that's why it really feels like such a dream to work with it. But it's a very neutral, grayy, beigey, with a lot of white in their base. And then it just has these flecks of all sorts of colors across the board. And when you see it as a whole, it just reads as a full wash of colors. You really can't pinpoint anyone in particular. It looks, I referenced before, it almost looks as if you had a painting smock that got just years and years and years and years of that, little speck of paint on it over and over, but like in the most beautiful and kind of couture way. It looks just so beautifully just paint it looks painted on. There's really no other way to describe it. And it's another one of those things like the Granada where I'm looking at this and thinking, oh, this is just perfect for this time of year as we enter the warmer months. The idea was always that this would be that thing I could throw on as my morning layer when I'm running out of the house and with a pair of jeans and a t-shirt or over top of my linens for work. I think that this is just that ultimate layering piece and it'll be so cozy and comfy. There's a silk component to the yarn, so it shouldn't be too warm, but it's still kind of thick. And with the pockets and everything, I mean, it's just ultimate luxe, bring your coffee outside in the morning wrapped up in this. That is the idea. And as we're getting into the season, it's making me excited to have this done, which I think we all need to just take a second to try and focus this year on organizing our knits in that way because it feels so good to come into a season with a project that you're actually able to wear rather than entering the season with like the Grayling dress. I'm not going to be able to wear that for months after getting a couple wears in, maybe if I'm lucky, in the next couple of weeks. So I definitely do want to prioritize scheduling my projects by what I'm wanting to work on and loving working on, but also something that feels kind of seasonally appropriate when it's done, even if it's not while I'm working on it. And sometimes that's tricky, but I know that it feels so much better when I do that. So I am really excited to be working on this. And maybe I'll start with some of my plans right now and just say that I'd love to see the button band be done by the time we bring this back in the next podcast. I think that's doable, maybe with a little push here and there. So that's why I'm saying it out loud. But I'd like to see the button band be done on this. And if not, maybe I'll have started the pockets or something. But that's a goal of mine. It seems feasible. So we'll see. Those are all of the projects that I've been working on. Like I said, lots of little things that kind of add up to just one big, we've been doing a lot of knitting, but I'm really feeling good about it. So the things that I didn't get to from the Fix Finish Freshen Up February that I'd like to focus on this week are going to be, of course, Wash Dad's sweater, and I want to finish the yoga winter sweater, all of the edits there. So the other cuff, and that has to get washed. There's like a lot of blocking that needs to happen this week, which also makes me think maybe in one of those washes, I can also throw in my Sailor Swift top, which really just needs a good washing. That's all it needed in the Freshen Up category. And then all I have left is my warm-up sweater, which needs the ends woven in. I'm going to keep that one kind of on the radar, as between that and the Poet's cardigan, which just needs the buttons and buttonholes shifted around a little bit. Those will be my two kind of floater projects that as I have a day when I'm like, I just want to work on something a little bit different, I can kind of grab one of those. But I feel like we're moving pretty well through them. Now, kind of as I'm talking about the future knitting plans that I have, I also figured I could use this time to soothe a little bit of the cast on cravings by doing some swatching. So on Instagram, which if you don't follow me, I'm not a huge poster on Instagram, but if I do post, it's usually some sort of poll because I love some feedback. So I'd thrown up a poll on Instagram at akanoraknits over the week where I was kind of quizzing you guys to see what I should cast on next, as I had a few different projects that all were kind of percolating around, and I was like, which one should I swatch for? I could have gone with any of them, so I figured I would just throw it out to you all. And it was funny because I had presented them in a kind of more ambiguous way of like, what color should I cast on next? And should it be color work, stockinette, cables? Should it be a cardigan, a pullover? And all of the answers resulted in one of the projects that I was considering. So I was like, all right, let me just test this now. I threw up the actual projects into another poll that I was actually considering casting on next, as well as with the colors, so that it kind of all made sense. And I was like, let's see, are you guys going to vote for the same thing again? And you did. So I did a little swatch. I have to go grab it though, so be right back. Okay, I really can't lie. This is actually where my brain has been for pretty much the past 2 days. I just had an idea and I had to act on it, which is a good time to make a swatch, because if this knit along was not in place and I wasn't holding back from casting on until I finished these other finishy FFF things, I would have just gone ahead and cast on this sweater. But it's a good thing I didn't, because it's allowed me to get some of my sneaky little, the curious thoughts. They popped up and I thought, can I do that? So the sweater that you guys basically asked, you pretty much asked me to work on next, is the Stitches sweater by Veronica Lindbergh. And it's been on my queue for years now. Since it came out, I've had different yarns and I'm like, maybe this. And I finally acquired some yarns late last year. Some were gifted, some were thrifted. And I said, that's what I want. So I have an issue because I have a gauge difference, but let me start with the first swatch. This is the first swatch that I had made. Now, I have never done one of those swatches where you like knit in the round and then clip the yarns after. I don't even know that I did it right entirely. And like with color work, like I don't knit color work. I don't even know who this girl is. Who made this? It wasn't me, but I did my best and I'm really happy with it. The thing was that I had been coloring in different color combinations on the little drawing that she does give you in the pattern, and that's nice. If you're looking to knit something color work or stripey, you can always just trace the pattern onto something else and kind of color it in, especially if you have something like an iPad where you could just do it on there. That's what I typically do. So I was playing around with so many different color combinations. I had to just try it out. And I'm really glad that I did. The colors that you're looking at, they are the colors that I'm planning to work with, but maybe not quite in this order. So these are all different single ply yarns that are 100% wool. And so when I realized that my gauge was obviously way off, her version, I think she says, is a DK. And these are like a chunky, bulky weight, but they're the colors that I wanted. And I wanted something cozy and sweatshirty. And to be perfectly honest, I didn't even care if it was practical or wearable. I really wanted just more to have fun, which is another good thing, I think, after all of the like really intense deadline knits that I've had. So it felt good to just play. And especially with color, it's very Easter egg to me, and that's kind of why I like it. So when I realized my predicament here of gauge is like pretty off, especially the row gauge is like way off, but also it looks like little chunky knits. Um, and then it's 100% wool, and the wool that it's knit on, it says on the label, like, great for felting. So then I decided to experiment. And what I'm about to show you is exactly that. It's an experiment. So don't judge me here. I just said, you know what? I did a ton of research, and then I was like, I need to just try this. So I, I don't know. I'm like nervous to show you. You guys are going to judge what I have here. And it's still wet, so it feels like a little dead animal. But I made another swatch in different colors because I didn't want to waste the colors that I plan to use. And I felted it, kind of. So this is what I have. This is wet. And I I knit this, I measured it, and then I threw it into a pillowcase and then into the wash and then into the dryer. And it like kind of thought about felting, but it wasn't felted. So then after a little bit more research, I took it to the bathtub and I grabbed some bubble wrap, and I basically used the bubble wrap as a washboard while I scrubbed the face of this thing onto the bubble wrap with burning hot water. There was a dab of dish soap and then freezing cold water. And I kind of went back and forth and did that. And I focused primarily on the one side. So this says stitches because when you knit it in the round, it says stitches, 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 stitches. But if you're wondering why it just says stitches, that's why. So on the chest side, that's where I really focused my attention doing this like hands kind of washing felting versus the stitch side, which was pretty much strictly felted in the washer and dryer. It definitely got a little residual kind of agitation while I was doing the other side, but it's definitely a lot more. You could still see the stitch definition on the stitch side versus the side, which is way more washed over. Now, I'm showing this to you because, first of all, I have a vision, and it's to completely change the Stitches sweater. I don't even know that I should get into it right now because it's like, it's just a lot. But think fleece quarter zip, but not a quarter zip. Instead, it's a snap up and like 90s style with horses on it, like a little cheesy and kind of weird, but then think of it like 90s or 80s Barbie if she was a knitter wanting to wear that. That's where I'm going with this. and so questions. If you have experience with felting, is there something else I could do to make this felt more easily? Should I have just gone back and forth from that washer and dryer multiple times? Should I have trusted the process a little bit more? And mostly because I'm finding that I have to like depill this side. Is this normal? I've never felt it anything before. So I thought I would just bring it up to you here today, because I'm satisfied actually kind of with the fabric I got. It's feeling really dense and stiff and the way that I want it to. And definitely in the parts where I really focused and worked the fabric, I'm getting exactly what I'm hoping for. So I don't mind putting in that effort in the end if it's going to result in that fabric. The only issue I really have is, yeah, I feel like I have to hit this with a depiller, because some of the white yarn kind of snuck into the brown that I used, and vice versa. So I'm wondering if that's something I did wrong in the agitation. I was kind of just swirling around. I was just playing with it. I'm kind of that's how I have to learn, is just to do, and then I can, I did a lot of research online, but you just have to try it sometimes. So that's what I had done. And that was really why I had focused on one side. And I figured I'd leave the other side for a little bit more love later. But I'm feeling very excited about this. I'm wondering if you have tips, advice, tricks for felting a sweater. Now, the reason too I'm saying I'm going to change it and make it a whole like quarter zip snap thing is because when you felt something, it does lose all of its stretch. So I don't expect to be able to pull this on over my head, but rather I just thought it would be kind of cool if it had like a little snappy thing. And if it was felted, it would be more jackety. I don't know. I'm really excited about it. If you could see the vision with me, I hope that you're excited too. And otherwise, you're probably like, why are you butchering a perfectly good sweater? But it's just something I got excited about and I had to try. And I'm kind of feeling like from the get-go, this project was never going to be something I was going to walk out of the house in on like a daily basis. It was more for around the house and stuff. So why not just go for it? I have an idea and I feel excited about it. And to be perfectly honest, if it is a flop, I'm not even upset. Like I'm just really excited to try something that I can see in my brain. And I love when that happens. And so I'm going to do as much kind of pre-work and little experiments and research ahead of time, and that's going to keep me from casting it on sooner than I want to so I can get everything else done. But I had to just show you where my head's at with this and ask if you have advice on felting, specifically sweaters. I would love to know any advice, anything you are willing to share with me. I would love it so much because I'm really excited with where we're at here. And I kind of wish I had just done the S on the end of this, because I even feel like this could have been a cool like wall hanging for it to say stitches, and instead it just says stitch. But yeah, this is kind of what's to come. And the reward at the end of the knit along is something in this department, and I feel really good about it. So yeah, the past couple of days, especially today, you might have noticed it's kind of dark and late because I've been bent over my bathtub trying to make this fabric felt. And for all the times people say I accidentally felted a sweater, wow, because this did not happen by accident, and I was really hoping it would. I also, other question, I felted the back too. Like I went through and agitated that where all of the floats are. And I don't know if I should have done that. I don't know. I was just playing. You tell me what I did wrong. I'm excited about it though. I feel good about this. And I even feel good about just the floats and everything in general. So this one I knit in the round. And then this one I knit flat, which meant that I was, doing the color work on the wrong side of everything. I don't know. I was feeling bold today. And I'm really excited about it. So let me know what advice you have for felting and get excited to see this. I think it's going to be really cool. I might eat my words, but right now I think this is going to be super, super cool. So that's everything. Like I said, if you're interested in participating in our casual, very easy peasy knit along, feel free to use hashtag fffFebruary. And if you want to kind of stay up to date a little bit more real time when I post things like those polls and stuff, you could just follow me over at Instagram at akanoraknits. And I think that's all I have for you today. Thanks for joining me for a really kind of cozy and chatty and chill episode. I think I needed this. So thank you so much for being here for me. If you did enjoy this video, I would definitely appreciate it if you would go ahead and give it a thumbs up. If you subscribe and ring that bell, then you're going to be notified anytime I post a new video. However, you can always count on there being a Saturday morning video every Saturday at 9:30 a.m. Eastern time. And with all that being said, a big ol' thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one. All right, you guys, bye.